Hello. I'm sorry I can't be with you guys tonight during our regularly scheduled time slot, 7 o'clock on Wednesday for Persuasion in Public Communication, but there's a good reason for it. I'm traveling to a conference called the Academic Chairpersons Conference. It's being held in New Orleans, and I'm making a presentation there, making a presentation on what it's like to be a department chair and to have to face ethical decisions. And the whole idea is to get the audience, who are also department chairs at universities, at other universities across the US, the whole idea is to get them talking about what it means to be a department chair and face ethical decisions almost every day. Like when a student comes to complain about a grade from another professor, how do I find the midway point to protect the professor's integrity, to make sure that this is not a complaint that is unfounded, but at the same time make sure that I'm sensitive to the student's needs and see if I can find a way to resolve that issue. It's not always easy when you're a department chair handling these kinds of things. And there's a lot that goes into the department chair ethically. So that's what I'll be talking about, and I'm hoping to learn as much as I'm hoping to share. I mean, after all, I've only been a department chair for 3 years. So I'm going to New Orleans tomorrow morning, and that's where I'm going to be. Why am I starting out our video class tonight this way? It's because, in a way, I'm trying to persuade you. I'm trying to persuade you that there's a good reason that I am missing class and that we are going to hold class online, which is what we're going to do today. So persuasion operates at a number of levels. And that bit that I opened class with was designed not to just render an opinion on your behalf. You have an opinion that we're missing class for a good reason. I mean, in actual fact, most students don't really mind when they miss class, so it's not something you have to win them over about. But really, students who are conscientious about the money that they're paying for classes and the education that they're getting, those kinds of students, they do like legitimate explanations for why professors miss classes. So why am I opening this class with talking about why I'm missing? It's because I also want you to have an attitude about it, not just an opinion about tonight. When an opinion is about a context, an attitude is a global, general orientation. So I want you to feel in general that if I miss class, and that if other professors miss class, it's for a good reason. And it kind of serves as our brief entry point for what we're talking about in the instructor video tonight as we take on these next two dimensions of attitudes in chapters 5 and 6. And the first chapter I'm not going to be going over in the video tonight. I'm going to be giving you an assignment in class. It's going to be designed to capture your knowledge, to have you demonstrate your knowledge on persuasion. I'm not going to go over every detail, but I'm going to set sort of the general parameters of what the chapter is about. The chapter 6, the second chapter, is a completely different chapter. It's all about measuring attitudes. Very statistically, though not completely statistically oriented, very numbers oriented. There's a lot of different scales that are mentioned, and that's also information that I'm going to ask you to be able to demonstrate your knowledge of in our assignments for tonight. So just to go over these two chapters in very general terms, the first one does get into attitude in more depth than we got into attitudes in the last two classes. And it starts out with asking, why do people have attitudes to begin with? And we know that people have attitudes for lots of different reasons, only some of which are mentioned in the book. One of them is knowledge. We have attitudes because we just like to have knowledge. Are you for or against global warming? Are you for or against climate change measures? It's something that you have to gain knowledge about to have an opinion about. So it's almost like we seek an opinion on that subject so that we can also gain knowledge and truly know what's going on with the temperature of the world. And maybe the reason that we haven't had snow this winter is because of that. It's something we're factoring into our everyday experiences. We want the knowledge, so we adopt an attitude. A second reason that we adopt an attitude is out of utility reasons. That means there's a usefulness to it. You've decided to like a certain kind of music because all of your friends like that music. Maybe you never liked country music before. Maybe you never liked rap. Maybe you never liked rock. But people you are hanging around, they're listening to that. You don't want to be denied hanging around them. So you start to change your attitude because it's useful to you. There is a utility to it. It serves a purpose. Not necessarily a core belief, the attitude, but it serves a purpose. It has utility. That brings us to the third reason now, which is the social adjustive reason. This is we adopt attitudes because it helps us get along with others. We've decided, for example, that we are not going to protest as parents our kids every single time that they don't pick up after themselves, don't clean up, don't make their bed, don't do their chores. We don't always follow that to a T, my wife and I, Kelly, but at least that's something we're trying to do. It's an attitude. It's an attitude because we want to get along with our kids. And we've told that if you tell people stuff that they do wrong all the time, causes friction. They have a bad view of themselves, or they have a bad view of what you have of them. So we're at least mindful of it. Whether we're successful or not, I don't know, but it's for socially adjustive purposes. We want to get along with the kids. For the same reasons, you adopt attitudes. Maybe when you're in high school and you were around people who were littering, and you in your mind didn't want to say anything about it because you felt that that would mean the end of the comfort that you have with that person. And even though you'd like to say something about it, you don't. You're adapting socially to that person by adopting a new attitude, which is, well, I'm not going to say it doesn't bother me that much, the litter, enough for me to say something about it. Yet another reason that we adopt attitudes is for social identity. We want to have a certain appearance to us. We want to project an image. We want people to see us in certain lights. So we take on an attitude of, oh, I can't stand that. I can't stand that team. I can't stand the New England Patriots. They've been in the Super Bowl all the time. Tom Brady's a cheater. Bill Belichick's a cheater. That team just doesn't follow the rules. They're always getting away with something, and they don't deserve. That's an attitude that is designed to express that you have a certain robust sports personality, and that football is something that's very meaningful and passionate to you. So you wear your passion on your sleeve with your attitude. It projects a certain social identity about you. Versus somebody who may say, I don't care about football. I don't care. My thing is horseback riding, or my thing is hockey. I like hockey. So football I'm indifferent to. I want to project that attitude that as much as everybody else likes football, I can stand up and say, I'm not really a guy that likes football. That's the way that I am. That's my identity. That's another way that we use attitudes. And lastly is the idea that we adopt attitudes because we become ego defensive. We use attitudes because they help us cope with certain things in life that protects our ego. So somebody, for example, who gets really mad when you're talking to them about something that they've done wrong. No, I didn't do that. You have to understand. It wasn't my fault. There are other reasons. Things like this go wrong and it doesn't happen to other people. It happens to me and I get blamed for it. Somebody like that may be adopting that attitude, that sort of bellicose hostility. Maybe those are too strong of words, but they're putting up a fight, right? They're being defensive, perhaps because they have a hard time examining whether they really did do something that is worthy of criticism. So since it hurts them to take a look at that, it shatters their own look at their own self-identity in some ways. What they do is they put up a defensive attitude that helps deflect away from that and helps them cope. That's the ego defensive. All right, so that's pretty much what I'm going to do for this chapter, because the rest of the chapter is going to expand on all of those reasons for why people adapt attitudes. The chapter goes into attitudes and behavior. It talks about how those two things are linked. What is the difference between behavior and what attitudes, and what the difference between an attitude and a behavior is. Also, the chapter goes into different models for projecting how people will behave when they adopt certain attitudes. I'm going to be asking you to apply one of those models tonight in one of our assignments. And the chapter pretty much ends on predicting behavior from attitudes. It's approaching attitudes and behaviors in a very linear cause-effect fashion, this chapter. And it makes sense because the next chapter is all about measurement, which is also looking at cause and effect. That's what the next chapter does. Chapter 6, attitude measurement. It starts off with all these scales that you can use to measure behavior, measure attitudes, I should say. The Likert scale being the one that's most popular, Likert. Most people don't know it's called that, but they see it all the time. You see it when you go to evaluate your professors at the end of a course, and you have to put a 1 or a 5, depending on whether you thought that you agreed with the question or whether you disagreed with it, where 5 is strongly agree, 1 is strongly disagree, and then you have 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That's your classic Likert scale. It's trying to get different gradations of a person's attitude, trying to quantify that. Then you have other scales. You have the Gutmann scale. You have the semantic differential. You have those scales. You can take a look at what they're all about. And then the chapter goes into discussing weaknesses of this kind of attitude measurement. I'm glad it does that because numbers don't really tell a lot of depth about human beings. They can do amalgamations of information. Numbers can do that. It means they can put together big, broad trends, like 67% of people say strongly agree. But when it comes to understanding what is behind that strong agreement and how deep and how long-lasting that strong agreement is going to be, you really have to talk to people and explore another method of research behind quantifying things through scales. So that's partly talked about in this chapter. It's talked about in the context of how context can influence the way people answer surveys. Even something like a bad mood can influence them. That's part of context. And the wording of the surveys themselves are not clear. I know that you've been your own critic when you filled out surveys for people and said, I really can't answer this question. They haven't given me the answer that I would truly answer. I'm being forced to choose an answer that's not my first choice. The chapter also talks about psychological issues and how that comes to play in the way that people answer questions when they're being surveyed for their attitudes. I don't know if you've ever been part of one of these consumer surveys where people call up and they ask you questions about what kinds of products you purchase. I don't know if you've ever been the recipient of one of these phone calls during election years asking you things about healthcare. I'm mostly in the demographic for that, not college students, but people making an income. But you may have received one of these phone calls and you may have been saying to yourself, I kind of have a way of thinking about this subject already that's influencing me. For example, when people call me and they ask me questions about politics, I already have some firm beliefs about politics. I already have some philosophies and some ideologies that I've been developing and following for years. So this presents a psychological twist on any persuasion that I'm going to get from somebody trying to persuade me about Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton or whoever else. I'm going to run it through my own psychological orientation that I already have about politics. I'm purposely not revealing that to you here now because I don't personally reveal politics. I don't believe it's appropriate in the classroom. I believe everybody's politics should be accepted. But I'm just telling you that this is an example for me of how psychology comes into play in the way that attitudes are constructed. The chapter finishes off with what it calls indirect methods of measuring attitudes. I want you to take a look at that as well. It's very interesting. It's a way of gathering data on people's attitudes without them knowing it because they're indirect. They're indirect observations. People are not aware that they're being observed. So in a way, it makes the information more natural and perhaps more trustworthy. At any rate, that's going to be it for the video lecture tonight. I want you to check out your email that I've sent out, which has this email, along with the instructions for what you're supposed to do for tonight's class. And I will give you a full report on how things went from a public communication standpoint. That's what I'm going to be doing at the conference. I'm going to be trying to persuade people that I have something to say about being a chairperson, that I have some insights as a communication professor, and that I'm inviting their ideas as well. Excuse me, long day, voice is very tired. So I'll be reporting on that to you as a method of feedback on this very subject of persuasion and public communication. I'll be reporting that back to you next Wednesday. In the meantime, I hope you have a great class. Send me any questions that you have about the assignments. Talk to you later.